Hi, I'm Marnie Campbell with the Marnie Campbell Realty Team, and I'm here today with Jen Matthias, co-founder of Mortgage 360. Thanks so much for joining me today, Jen.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Marnie.
So I wanted to have you share your insight and your expertise about what's happening in the mortgage world right now. We're seeing a lot of information put out there, and obviously that information is changing daily. I know we've had conversations throughout this whole time period, but hoping I could just ask you a few questions to get a current insight on the snapshot of what's happening right now.
You bet. No, I'd love to. It definitely seems like things can change, like a month happens in a day over these last couple of weeks. So things are quickly changing and it's hard to stay on top of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would you say is the biggest change in the mortgage world right now, kind of pre-COVID and now?
Yeah, I think the most interesting and biggest change that we've seen is the switch to virtual. So, and that seems to be across all platforms for the entire transaction. So, from the pre-approval process, signing documents, lawyers have switched to doing things virtually. I know realtors have switched to doing things somewhat virtually or very, very different. But that switch seemed to happen really quickly, and it's helped to keep things moving, which is great. And I think that it's something that we might take forward into the post-COVID world, just being able to work with those technologies and that sort of thing to make the transaction a little bit smoother, or to give options to clients to be able to move forward.
Yeah, it's funny that things that weren't possible yesterday all of a sudden are everyday, you know, happenings in regards
Definitely,
to lawyers and mortgages and all that kind of stuff. So, be interesting to see how we end up on the other side of this with regards to
definitely.
those kinds of transactions. So how have you seen mortgage applications change, whether it be, from the numbers you're getting from the same time last year or even like over the last month while we've been dealing with this?
Right. There's definitely been a weird sort of trend as far as things are concerned. When this all sort of broke in March, we had a huge influx of applications because people were looking to either potentially look at refinancing, lower their interest rate, because we had that time where rates like just dropped like crazy over a week period. So we did have an influx over the previous year. I think we're up about 50% in applications
Hmm.
between March 2019 to March 2020. Obviously, some of those applications are things that, we didn't end up changing because the clients had a great interest rate or didn't make sense for them to do. Some of them were job loss, so we weren't able to move forward. And then moving into April, it seems like things have flattened out a little bit. We are not yet at the end of the month, so the numbers are a bit skewed, but a little bit down. I think about 35% to the same time last year, which I think is somewhat the same as what the listing and the sales in April from 2019 to 2020 is as well on the real estate side.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing down numbers, and I put out a video about a week ago talking about that because it makes sense. People aren't out shopping for homes, and if they don't have to be right now, they're kind of putting that on pause. So the declining numbers, it does seem to coincide with everything that's happening. So
Definitely. And from our perspective, we also always do have those other transactions. So whether it be a refinance transaction or a renewal that might be coming up. So they don't always line up exactly, but you can kind of see that trend of people not getting out unless it's absolutely necessary for them to do so.
right. So you bring up refinancing. I think a lot of people don't really understand what that means. They hear the term a lot, but if they've never done it before, can you just give me a really brief overview of what that means and how someone might apply for it, or if even it would be applicable to them?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really important question because a lot of people aren't sure how that works and they expect, oh, well, I own a home, I can refinance it. And that's not always the case. So, the number one thing to consider is that you do need it to be in a position of, more than 20% equity to be able to draw out. So, the guideline is that the maximum that you can borrow against your property on a refinance is 80%. So you need to be in a position where you have more than that in equity to be able to draw some funds out. Now, sometimes people will refinance their home, maybe to get a lower interest rate or the potential of paying out some consumer debt that they might have. And so it would be based upon what the current value of the property is, and then what you owe versus what you're looking to borrow. The opposite to that, which we're seeing a lot of right now, is called a transfer. So on a transfer situation, you don't need to have that 20% equity or more position to be able to do it. You're essentially transferring from one lender to another, in most cases for a better interest rate.
And are you seeing a lot of those right now?
We are, just because of the rate environment, with penalties being lower than they used to be and rates being fairly low. People are looking at, even people that maybe got mortgages last year or in the last 2 years, in the kind of 3% range, and now they can be looking sort of in that 2% range, or on a variable, 2.5, maybe 2.35. So it makes sense for them to lower that interest rate and transfer over. And in that case, the new lender that they're switching to will be covering all of the fees for them to transfer, as well as potentially capping into the mortgage their penalties. So it's fairly low or non-existent fees for them to be able to do that to save some money.
Awesome. That could be a lot of options for a lot of people.
Oh, definitely. We're looking at a lot of those compared to, we are doing some refinance files, but lots of people are not in the position to be able to draw equity out, but they are in a position where they can transfer their mortgage over, and it would often make sense for them to do that.
Great. So what would you say if someone said, what's the most common misunderstanding right now, or questions that you're getting from your clients?
Yeah, so from my existing client database, the most common misconception is around deferrals. So I know when the government came out and it was sort of just a blanket statement of everybody gets deferrals. And it was like, okay, well, so then what happened was the system got bogged down by everybody that had a mortgage asking for a mortgage deferral. And they're simply not just providing them to everyone. Generally, it's if you're under financial hardship because of this COVID situation, that's when they would be providing you with a deferral. So I think that's a bit more understood now, but initially people were calling and I would say, well, have you lost your job? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, well, you're unlikely to qualify for the deferral at that point.
Right.
It doesn't mean that some didn't slip by and they just sort of processed them, but they do have some questions that they're asking surrounding whether or not they'll allow that.
Well, and I guess the important thing to remember is, at the end of the day, that money still has to be paid.
Well, exactly. It gets tacked on to the end of your mortgage. You're essentially paying interest on interest. And if you don't need to take it, I would recommend, plugging through, and hopefully this is over soon enough and everybody's back to work.
Great. One final question. If people are wanting to get in the market right now in terms of a mortgage, a new buyer, what should they know?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think every couple of days I get an email and it's always the same question. Are mortgages still happening? Because people just aren't sure, and everybody's kind of got a reason to get in the market right now. Lots of people with leases coming up in the summer, and they're like, you know what, we really don't want to sign into a new year-long lease. So the recommendations that I would give to them is just to make sure that they have a bona fide pre-approval. So that means that their broker has reviewed their income documents, that everything is ironclad. A lot of times either brokers or banks will only just kind of provide you with a light, oh great, you make this much, here's what you technically could purchase for. And then once those documents have been reviewed, things can change a lot. So we've always done that. That's what we do from start to finish all the time, not just in COVID. It's always important for us to send people out and know for sure that they're going to be able to be qualified for that purchase. But just to make sure that that's in place for them, because whether you're putting your home on the market and buying another property, or you're just getting into the market, it's going to be beneficial for you at this point to know for sure that you can move forward. The other item would just be to review the stability of your job. So as we know, there's lots of people whose jobs are not affected by this pandemic, but just to make sure that there's probably not going to be a possibility for layoff kind of mid-process.
No, that makes total sense. And I can speak personally as someone where many of my clients have used you over the years. I always know they're in such great hands. And you've also taken over files mid-process where something has happened as a kind of hiccup along the way with the person they were currently working with, and you've come in and kind of salvaged something that didn't look like it could be. And you know, I've been very, very grateful over the years. My clients have had you as a resource. So if anyone else wanted to reach out to you with questions for themselves, what's the best way to do that?
My phone number is 403-863-9770. And then by email, jen@mortgage360.ca.
All right. Thank you so much, Jen, again, for taking the time to do this. I know you're busy at home, both of you working also with a young son at home. So thank you so much. Okay. Thanks again, Jen.
Thanks, Marnie.